Welcome back. This is our first notes of 2020, and it's been a while since we've done notes. We are going to be talking about ratios and rates. We'll start off our notes with an introduction to ratios. It's a concept that it starts, I think, in 5th grade and progresses into 6th grade, and it is probably the biggest concept in 6th grade mathematics. So let's get started. I'm going to start with definitions. A ratio is a comparison of two or more, and that or more will be important later in our unit, quantities. And remember, quantities is just numbers, by division or multiplication, because multiplication is the opposite, and this again will become more apparent the deeper we go into our chapter. So a ratio is a comparison of two or more quantities by division or multiplication. There are two types. There are part to part ratios, and there are part to whole ratios. One more word I'm going to define, and you'll see in your textbook that it might ask you to write what the terms of the ratio are, and kids sometimes get stuck when they come upon that word terms, and it just means what number or numbers are being represented in the problem. So if it says what are the terms of the problems, what are the terms in the problem, it just wants you to write what are the numbers. So I just write that down in case you should get stuck while you're working out of your textbook. All right. There are 3 ways to write a ratio. You'll see 3 different ways to represent a ratio. And the first way is with a colon. And a colon is 2 dots like we use in time. An example is 34 colon 100, 17 colon 50. And we use the word to when we are reading it. So this would read 34 to 100, 17 to 50. You don't use the word 34 colon 100. It's 34 to 100. The second way is with the actual word to. So 34 to 100 or 17 to 50. These are the same thing, just expressed differently. The last way, and probably the most common way that you will see a ratio, is in fraction form. Which would be 34 to 100, 17 to 50. And what's especially important is that when you see a ratio written as a fraction, you have to remember it's not a fraction. And that's where it can be a little bit confusing. There are rules for ratios in fraction form, which I'm going to go over. The first rule of ratios in fraction forms is that you do not turn improper ratios into mixed numbers. The top number can be larger because it's a ratio and not a fraction. So I can have something that says 100 to 34. And I do not have to change it. You do, however, have to simplify. And so ratios can be simplified. They just cannot be turned into improper fractions. I would say that this would then be 50 to 17. And that's the simplest form. I'm reducing it. So I can reduce or simplify ratios, but I do not need to turn them into improper. It's not the same. The second rule is that decimals and even fractions are allowed in a ratio. So for example, I can have a ratio that reads 5 to 3.5. And when I think the biggest difference when we read a ratio or look at a ratio is that this bar, instead of saying out of, when we use a fraction like 50 out of 17 or 5 out of 3.5, we use the word to. So think, when I'm saying or reading a fraction, I use out of. When I say or read a ratio, I use the word to. So this would be 5 to 3.5, 50 to 17. I could have 5 3/4 to 9.5. And this would be a ratio. It is not a fraction. The third rule is that ratios look or can look. Ratios can look like fractions, but they have ratio properties. Everything I just said, you have to remember. They are not fractions. It's not out of. They're not parts. Well, they can be parts, but I don't want to confuse you. Okay? It's a comparison of a quantity. All right. I'm going to also tell you one more special rule about ratios. And this doesn't matter if it's in fraction form or any of the other forms. one more rule about ratios that will become extremely important, again, as we go deeper into the chapter. Probably even the next part is that you cannot compare two quantities using a ratio if the quantities can't be converted into the same unit. And that's one big long rule that might not make sense right now, but it's mostly when we're talking about measurement. And it will become important in just a little while. Again, as we go deeper into the chapter, you cannot compare two quantities using a ratio if the quantities can't be converted into the same unit. And what that means is, if I have something that is in feet and I want to try and compare it to something, it has to be, those feet have to be converted into another unit of measurement that are centimeters or meters or kilometers. I can't compare feet with gallons because gallons is how we measure liquid. So it sounds a little confusing now, but we're going to do an activity that will help you understand this more a little bit, again, as we go deeper into the unit. But I wanted to have it in our notes so you remember. I'm going to do one really quick example, again, because this is our introduction to ratios, so it should seem fairly easy. I have to flip my paper over, and then I'm going to give you a to-do, and that will be it for our notes for today. I'm going to draw you an example with a bar model, and we will again be using bar models for this unit because it's going to help us really understand. I'm going to start you with a very, very simple bar model. Super simple. And basically, it's just to represent the problem. And the more we go into the chapter, the deeper and larger and more complicated these will get. But stick with me. So, a red rod is 5 centimeters long. A blue rod is 9 centimeters long. So that's the information that we have. So I'm going to draw a picture of the red rod. Four cuts will give me 5 boxes. The blue rod has 9 boxes. And you remember, if we're attending to precision, we want to make them look as equally as we can. So we know that these 5 boxes have to match. And then there's 4 more on the blue because the blue is 9. So, and leave a little bit of room because we might draw another one in just a second. So the question is, what is the ratio of the length of the red rod to the blue rod? And our answer would just be red rod 5 to 9, or 5:9, or 5 to 9. All said exactly the same. 5 to 9, 5 to 9, 5 to 9. These would all be correct answers. Now, if they asked, what is the ratio of blue to red, then it would be 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. It's extremely important to read the way that they're asking. Because red rod comes first in this problem, the red number has to come first. If you wrote 5 to 9 for this top problem, it would be incorrect. You have to put it in the order that it asks. That's why blue to red down here is 9 to 5. If you had written 5 to 9 on this second question, it would be incorrect. Now I'm going to ask, so here's the comparison of two numbers. We're going to add 3 numbers in there. So I'm going to draw a yellow rod. That is 7. And now here's my third question, sorry. What is the ratio of the lengths, and they're all in centimeters. Each one of these represents a centimeter, right? All of these little boxes of the blue to yellow to red rods. So, first one is blue, 9, yellow, 7, red, 5. Now, with 3 or more numbers, you cannot write it in fraction form. It has to be either colon form or word form. Most likely you will see it in colon form. So again, fraction form is only with 2 numbers. Okay. I'm going to give you a to-do that you will come in and talk to your table group about tomorrow. And there is going to be a question. The second question I didn't go over, but hopefully you'll be able to figure it out based on inference. Okay. So the information for the problem, please write it down. There are 55 adults and 32 children at a party. That's all the information that you need to know. Now you need to be able to answer the 2 questions. Question 1. What is the ratio of adults to children and question 2, what is the ratio of children to the total number of people at the party. Okay, so those are the 2 questions that you need to have answered. You do not have to write all 3 forms. Pick one of the forms that you like best to answer the problem. And then we'll come in and discuss those 2 answers tomorrow.